Welcome to the church family that is lifting lives through living love, inspiring hope, filling with faith, and transforming our world. These recorded messages are made available so that you might have additional opportunities to stay connected with us, and that you might learn and grow in your faith. God bless you as you hear the word today. And now, the message.
Genesis 45, 4 through 15. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for your remnant on earth and to save lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made a father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and your grandchildren, your flocks and herds and all you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really who I am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt and about how everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly." Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin embraced weeping, and he kissed all of his brothers and wept over them. Afterward, him and his brothers talked with him.
Well, we've had a great morning so far, but this story that Alice just read it's like the tail end of a really long story in the book of Genesis that our kids have spent the whole week in VBS kind of studying and learning. So I'm going to kind of give the short version. Kids, you already know this story inside and out, but for all the adults in the room, I'm going to kind of recap a little bit. Let's start with Joseph when he was a young man. When he was a boy, he was like, he had the world at his fingertips. He was smart, he was capable, he was handsome, he was charismatic, and most importantly, he was his father's favorite son. His father doted on him for all those reasons, and also because he was the oldest child, the first child of his father's favorite wife. And his father gave him special gifts, like a special robe, and Joseph just felt as big as the world. Joseph also had this special ability that he could interpret dreams. And when he was a little boy, he had a dream that all of his brothers were one day going to bow down to him. And so in some ways, the story Alice just read is like a fulfillment of that vision he had when he was a little boy. But Joseph did not take a direct route there. For starters, he made the mistake of telling his brothers, many of whom were older and bigger than him, of telling them, someday God gave me a dream and you're going to bow down to me. Which, as you might imagine, kids, if you had to bow down to your brother or your sister, how would you feel about that, right? Not very good. And so Joseph's brothers reacted very angrily. They beat him up, they threw him into a pit, and then they sold him into slavery. Like a caravan that was passing by, sold him into slavery, and that caravan took Joseph all the way down to Egypt. Now, when he was in Egypt, he was sold to a man named Potiphar, who was a very important official in Egypt. And Joseph, because he was smart and capable and intelligent, he quickly rose through the ranks and before long was in charge of all of Potiphar's household. So, he very quickly rose to a position of prominence. But the problem was, remember I said he was handsome, charismatic, and Potiphar's wife took a liking to him. She kind of had a little crush on him and approached him romantically, and Joseph refused her. He ran away, and she grabbed hold of his robe, and he was so desperate to get away from her that basically his robe came off, and that gave Potiphar's wife the evidence she needed, and she twisted around and said, Joseph was the one who was hitting on her. Here's the robe, can't you see? And she had Joseph thrown into jail because she was mad that he didn't return her romantic interest. And so Joseph, who had done nothing wrong, went to jail. But guess what? Even in jail, all those things that were true about Joseph continued to be true. God's favor was upon him. And the chief jailer entrusted him. And before long, he was kind of running the jail, And in the process of being in the jail, he met two people who had positions of importance and authority for the Pharaoh. One was his cupbearer, the one who carried and was responsible for taking care of the Pharaoh's cup so that no poison would ever enter it. And the other who was his chief baker. And they had dreams, and Joseph interpreted them. And he said, 3 days from now to the cupbearer, you're going to be restored to your position. You're going to be back where you were. But to the baker, I'm sorry, 3 days from now. And guess what? 3 days later, those things happened. And the cupbearer was so excited that he was getting out of prison. He said, Joseph, I'm going to tell your story. I'm going to tell everyone about this amazing person I met who interpreted my dreams. Except he didn't. He forgot. He got out of jail, went back to his position, and completely forgot about the jail and all the people in it. And so for 2 more years that passed. 2 more years passed before Pharaoh one day had a dream. And this was a scary dream from him. It was about thin, sick cows that were eating healthy, fat cows. And he was so troubled by it, he went to his chief priest, his magicians, and said, what is this dream about? And they couldn't interpret it. And that's when the cupbearer remembered, oh, I knew a guy when I was down in prison. He interpreted my dream. And so at that point, Pharaoh called for Joseph to be brought out of prison. And Joseph interpreted the dream. He said, the 7 fat cows are for the next 7 years. You're going to have this bountiful harvest. But then after those 7 bountiful years will come 7 years of famine. Those are the skinny cows that are eating the fat cows. And so you need to take advantage of these next 7 years to store up grain so that when the famine comes, you'll be prepared for it. People won't starve. And Pharaoh was so impressed with Joseph that he said, I tell you what, I like your idea, and I'm going to put you in charge of this whole project. And Joseph once again found himself being second in command, right underneath Pharaoh. Now, the brothers who lived in, a far distance away, the famine hit them too. And so after a couple years, they had no food at all. They were hungry. But they heard down in Egypt, they have grain to spare. And so their father sent them down to Egypt to ask for grain. Now, they didn't recognize Joseph when they first see him. Why would they have? I mean, they sold him into slavery. They would have never thought their brother would become Joseph's right-hand man. So they begged for grain, and Joseph wasn't quite ready to forgive them just yet. He gave them grain, but he also messed with them a little bit. Like he hid in the grain silver goblets, and he, and then he demanded that they leave their youngest brother Benjamin with him, as payment for their sins and their crimes. And at that point, the brothers broke down. They're like, we can't leave our youngest brother Benjamin with you. It would break our father's heart. And so they're begging and they're bowing down to Joseph, crying out on behalf of their brother Benjamin. And at that moment, Joseph's heart breaks when he sees his brothers begging for Benjamin. He breaks down, he weeps so loudly that all the Pharaoh's household could hear it. And that's when he reveals, guys, it's me. It's Joseph. Remember? He sold me into slavery. Remember all the things that happened? But now I'm here, and God had a purpose for this. And when he's reunited with his family, they weep, they cry. It's this beautiful moment. It's a fulfillment of the dream he had when he was 15, 14 years old. But the way the dream turned out was totally different than anything he could have predicted. Now, here's the one little point I would make. If you had to draw Joseph's journey from that vision he had when he was a little boy all the way to this verse that Alice read just a moment ago when he described it, how would you draw, if you had to put it on a big piece of paper, like a timeline, and graph it? It'd be all over the place, right? It looked like Billy from Family Circus. And for all you little kids who didn't grow up reading the Sunday cartoons and Billy and Family Circus, you can have fun trying to trace Billy's steps. That was always one of my favorite things to do was when those family circles to watch where Billy went. But that was how it would look, right? I mean, Joseph went everywhere. And there were times where it looked like he was going the exact opposite of the dream he once had, when he was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, accused of adultery, thrown into prison. I mean, at any of those times, Joseph could have thought, man, remember that dream I once had? Wasn't that silly? How far away I am from that ever coming true. I was so stupid to think my brothers would one day. I was so stupid to think I was something big. And yet, when Joseph says to his brothers everything that happened, he doesn't describe it like this, like on some crazy line. Instead, he draws it as a straight line. He says, everything God did, everything that happened was by God's hand. God sent me before you to preserve life. God sent me before you. It was not you who sent me here, but God. Everything. In other words, there was not a single detour on my path. Not once did I go in a direction that God didn't want me to go. Everything took place to prepare me for this. And that's not something I imagine Joseph could have said when he was in prison or when he was in slavery. I'm sure there's lots of times where he didn't understand, couldn't see what God was doing. But looking back from his vantage point now, he could see God did everything for a reason. Not just to put him in a position to help others, but to shape his character. As a young man, he thought the dream was about like him, right? Like my glory, everyone bowing down to me. He'd understand that God was going to put him in a position of authority so that he could bless and help others. And everything he went through, whether it was the slavery or whether it was the being in prison, it shaped him. It taught him to be patient. It taught him to trust God. It taught him to be humble. It taught him to be sensitive to the needs of others. Everything prepared him so that one day he would be in this position to helping others. And I guess the one point I want to make is that we can't always see where God is leading. It might feel like we're going in the wrong direction. It might feel like this is the exact wrong place where I should be. And yet God has a purpose for every place where we are. One of my favorite books is a book called Jayber Crow by Wendell Berry. And it's Wendell Berry, Jayber Crow is the main character. He's a barber in a small town of Port William, Kentucky. But he has this moment where he reflects on his life. And to me, I'm going to read these words, but they to me sound a lot like Joseph could have said this too. He said, if you could do it, I suppose, it'd be a good idea to live your life in a straight line. Say, starting in the dark wood of error, proceeding by logical steps through hell and purgatory and into heaven. But that's not the way I've done it. So far, at least. I'm a pilgrim, but my pilgrimage has been wandering and unmarked. Often what looked to me like a straight line instead has been a circling or doubling back. And I've been in the dark wood of error any number of times. I've known something of hell, purgatory, or heaven, but not always in that order. The names of snares and dangers have been made known to me, but only seen them in looking back. Often I've not known where I was going until I was already there. I've had my share of desires and goals, but my life has come to me mainly by way of mistake and surprise. And often I've received better than I deserved. And sometimes my fairest hopes have rested on bad mistakes. In other words, I'm an ignorant pilgrim crossing a dark valley. And yet for a long time looking back, I've been unable to shake off the feeling that I have been led. Make of that what you will. So I hope that's the hope that you have today, the unshakable feeling that you are being led. Because sometimes we end up in places we don't want to be. Kids, have any of you had to move before? Moving's hard, right? Like leaving a place, a home and friends, everyone you know, and then going to a place. Adults, how many of you had to move before, right? And it's tough to leave a place where everything is familiar and to go to someplace else. But we recognize whenever we have to move, God is with us. The thing I love about Joseph's story is that everywhere he went, it says God's favor rested upon him. He trusted in God, he honored God, and let God unfold his path. And so I hope that's the encouragement Joseph's story can give to all of us, to trust in God, to realize that God has a reason for allowing all things to happen, that we may not always understand his wisdom, but we can always trust his will, that his will for us is good. And if God is leading us, he's leading to a place where not only we will be blessed, but he's shaping us even now to be a blessing unto others. So we have one more thing we'd like to do today, and that's Pastor Seth, if you'll come up and join me. Those of you who are visiting our church, perhaps for the first time today, you may not know this, but Pastor Seth, this is his last Sunday with us. The reason I asked how many of you have moved is Seth's about to move with his family, and that's a hard thing to do, even if it's exciting. So he's going to begin in a couple weeks at a new church in Fort Wayne.
Correct.
And so we wanted to take a few moments to allow him to address us for the last time. First, I just want to say, as he said earlier, this is not the way Pastor Seth usually looks. This is more like I wore this in your honor, shorts and sneakers.
Everybody said, where are the red shoes?
Yeah, well, I don't have red shoes, so I have blue shoes. That's the best I could do.
I've got Chacos in the car. I'll switch over to those for the picnic
For the picnic afterward. Hey, but this morning we were looking at, we're like, this is a bizarro Sunday that Seth's the one who's dressed up. So
you've entered the twilight zone.
Right. So, but I just wanted to invite Seth for a moment to reflect. First off, the first thing Joseph's story is about sometimes you end up in places where you would have never predicted or wanted to go, and yet it turns out for God's will. And so in your own life, have you had that experience of sometime God leading you in a direction that at the time you didn't understand where God was leading, but looking back you could understand?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So when my wife and I graduated from college, we felt that God was calling us to go on staff with an organization called Cru, formerly known as Campus Crusade for Christ. It was an organization we've been very involved with in college that had poured into us, into our faith, and given us opportunities to serve. And that's where we felt God was leading us. So we applied, we went to new staff training, and we returned home because it's a support-raised mission to raise support. And it was then that we found that while in college, her dad had taken out some student loans for her to fund her education that she didn't know about, and that just put us in a financial situation where, suddenly that door was closed. And so instead of moving to a new town, to a college campus or ministry to serve, we ended up in my hometown, which is a small town, living in an efficiency apartment on my parents' property, wondering what just happened to us. It was a time where it just felt like the bottom dropped out and we had no idea what was going on. It felt like God was distant and we just weren't sure, how good could come from this. And yet when we're now standing here looking back, I can see how God was actually close in that time, how God was the one who was carrying us and leading us, directing us. And it was in that season that this story that we've talked about today of Joseph just became so powerful to us, even when we didn't know what was coming up. When you hear the story and things are good, it's sometimes hard to hear it. But when the things get bad and you hear his story, you're like, oh, well, certainly God can work through this. And so now looking back, I can see how God did the same thing in our lives, how he actually used that time to redirect us, to form us, to shape us. It was in that season that I received my call to go to seminary to end up becoming a pastor who I am today. But it was just this reminder that God truly does, as Paul said in Romans 8, work all things together for the good of those who love him.
Yeah. Well, and your journey here to Zionsville,
yeah.
This was not your picture when you accepted a call into ministry. This is not your picture of where you would serve. So say a little bit about how you came here to Zionsville and maybe the crooked path that turned straight here.
Yeah, so when I moved I was already living in the county, serving another ministry at the time, and somebody said, Zionsville UMC, big steeple, big church, is that the goal for you? And I was like, no. Definitely not. In all seriousness, I was like, no. But little did we know, God had other plans. In 2016, we were sent here by the conference to this county, to Boone County, to assess the potential to plant a new church in the Whitestown area for those who would otherwise not be involved in church or not interested in typical church. And so I was sent up to Lebanon, to Otterbein, to serve there part-time while we did this kind of exploratory work. And after kind of a year and a half of exploration while there, you actually came on board here at ZMC, and we got together and had conversations about how could we work together to share in mission. What could a partnership look like to better engage in that kind of ministry? Because we know it's this shared area. We'd already partnered together doing an Alpha course and a spread cheer event, which thanked first responders. But you gathered together leaders at your house, and we actually had conversations about, we could do something very loose, but it started very quickly go to, well, no, we should do something more intimate. And to my surprise, it was, no, we should actually make this part of our church, of what we're doing here. And I'll never forget, one of the leaders said, what we're talking about is not just doing something different as a church. This is a call to be different as a church, to be a church that goes to the people. Many times we expect that people will show up here on a Sunday morning. When we come attractional, they'll come here. But it's a call to go to them, to the least, the last, and the lost. And share the love of Christ with them in what we say and what we do, just to be the people that God has called us to be. So yeah, it was unexpected, but in all the turns, it just feels like I've been here for such a time as this, to put in the words of Ruth, the right place at the right time. So
yeah, such a time as this. So Seth's first Sunday was March 2019.
Yeah.
And I remember the Sunday because the week before was the St. Louis conference, and it was when our denomination really began to go through what is turning into a split. And that was Seth's first Sunday here. Woo. And woohoo, yay. And then we've gone through COVID together. We've gone through struggles with
all the stuff just going on in the society.
Everything in politics and race and all the struggles taking place in society. And Seth, so Seth has lived here at Zionsville through a tumultuous time.
Yeah.
And as you look back on such a time as this, these handful of years, 4 years here at Zionsville, what do you think God's been doing in you and through you in this place?
Yeah, so I think one of the blessings that I've seen, I've been able to receive so much, like in personal relationships. That always stands out. When people think of what were the blessings, well, might think of big things, but a lot of it's just the small things. It's the blessings that of having those personal relationships, not only with you, with the staff, being part of a team, with those in the congregation and in the community, and being able to baptize kids, and being able to see people who were not Christians before decide to walk with Jesus. Those are fantastic things in the midst of it. I've also been blessed that, as I said, for such a time as this, it's like in each season, I've been able to use the gifts and the talents that I have. Like there's been a need, there's been a place for me to use it. And even as if it shifted, there's always been that opportunity. It reminds me of the Joseph story of when you summarizing, you said, in each of those, God showed him his favor. Now, it doesn't mean that it was perfect. It doesn't mean that it was easy, but it was good. And I've seen that in each of that season. That's been a faithful reminder for me. Well,
I want to say thank you for your leadership the last 3.25 years, because I wouldn't have, the pandemic's been hard, and everything we've gone through has been hard, and I have really relied heavily on Seth's leadership, his friendship, and couldn't have done it, I don't think, with anyone else in the same way. So thanks, Seth.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for taking the risk on me when
even in shorts and red guy. Converse. So
thanks. Thanks.
Yeah. So we have a short video that our staff put together of some folks saying thank you. So direct your attention to the screen.
One of the things that I truly love about Seth is that he knows a lot about everything, but I enjoyed it most when we had lunch together at the back table in the office. I really looked forward to those times because he talked about apples, birds, New York, you name it, gardening, and he'd bring kale to the office, and it was just a fun time for us to get together and just chat, and I just will cherish those moments, but also miss them too because I really enjoyed our time together.
The thing I'm most going to miss is Seth has this incredible passion for people who are not at the church. You know, people who would maybe never feel comfortable coming into a church. So he was always advocating, always pushing, how are we going out and reaching those in our community?
I'm really gonna miss having you next to me in my office, the conversations, you just popping around the corner, the laughs. But as I was thinking about what I wanted to say, I realized we've been together for the past 6 years pretty much. We were in the REM process, the same ordination class, and then somehow we both ended up at ZUMC, and it's been quite a journey, one that I've enjoyed immensely. You have a beautiful family, and I know that you're gonna go on to do great things, and so appreciate your friendship and ministry.
What I love the most about Seth is his servant's heart and his passion to serve others and teach them about Jesus' love.
Seth, one of the things I have appreciated about you and your time here at Zionsville UMC is your desire to see everybody take their next step. Whether that has been just learning more about the church, about our church in particular, or what does faith look like to them, or take a bigger step of plugging in, finding a place to serve, and live out their ministry and their faith wherever they find themselves. You have always been there encouraging, pushing people to take whatever their next step looks like.
I wish you the very best in your new location. They're lucky to have you. Don't worry though, I'm putting a copy of the apple chart in everyone's mailbox so we won't forget our apple facts.
Good morning. My name is John Elligood, and I'm the Director of Communications here at Zionsville UMC. Thank you for joining us today. We'd love to get to know you more and spend some time with you. If you'd like to know more about our faith community, please visit our church website at zumc.org. There, you'll find the many ministry opportunities that we have to offer. If you need to contact one of our staff members, all our contact information is at the bottom of all of the church web pages. You can also connect with us via social media throughout the week for daily inspiration and community. You'll find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube under username Zionsville UMC. Once again, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we hope that you have a great week.